Hello and welcome to another TLDR Explains video. In this one we're going to explain the House of Lords, because it's been in the news a fair bit recently. As we discussed in our video earlier this week, the Lords attempted to amend Johnson's Brexit bill, which somewhat upset the Tories. But it's not the only reason that the Lords have been in the news recently. A couple of days ago, Conservative Minister James Cleverly confirmed that the government has been thinking about moving the House of Lords to York when Parliament starts renovations in 2015. And last week, Rebecca Long-Bailey, one of the front-runners in the Labour leadership election, said that she'd replace the Lords with an elected Senate. This idea, or variations of it, had been floated in the past. Nigel Farage was always a fan of it when he was running UKIP, and Nick Clegg attempted something similar while he was in coalition. So, in this video, we're going to try and explain why the House of Lords has always been controversial with leading figures from all the main parties, as well as what the Lords actually does, and who the Lords are. Before we do though, this topic was recently voted for by our patrons, who said they wanted a whole series of videos about the House of Lords. If you want to say in the videos we make in the future, then you can sign up to be one of our patrons now. There's a link to that in the description. So, let's get going. What is the House of Lords? Well, technically it's the upper chamber of government, and its full official title is the Right Honourable, the Lords Spiritual and Temporal of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in Parliament assembled. But for obvious reasons, no one ever calls it that. There are currently 794 Lords, though unlike the Commons, there's no fixed number, so this is subject to change. Of these 794, 244 are Conservatives, 180 are Labour, 92 are Lib Dem, and 242 are non-affiliated, independent or crossbenchers. There are also 26 bishops in the House, known as Lords Spiritual, and 10 representatives of other smaller parties. Of the 794, 92 are hereditary peers, making the UK the only country in the world, apart from Lesotho, to have hereditary peers. That might sound bad, but until the House of Lords Reform Act in 1999, there were some 600 hereditary peers, so I guess at least it's progress. On that note, according to the House of Lords Reform Act of 2014, Lords are removed if they don't turn up for a whole parliamentary session, or if they commit a crime. Technically, according to the House of Lords Expulsion and Suspension Act of 2015, Lords can also be removed by vote if the other Lords decide on it, but this has never happened yet. The Lords are technically appointed by the Queen, although usually on the recommendation of the Prime Minister. There are two main times that the Prime Minister gets to recommend laws: at the end of Parliament, in what's known as the Dissolution Honours, or when the Prime Minister resigns, for the Prime Minister's Resignation Honours. Since the House of Lords Reform Act of 1999, any recommendations have to be approved by an independent body, called the House of Lords Appointments Commission. The Commission also makes occasional independent recommendations to the Queen for non-political appointments. Because Parliament was dissolved recently, we're actually due a dissolution honours list quite soon. And controversially, we know that Johnson has not recommended John Bercow for a peerage, breaking the convention that the Speaker of the House of Commons gets a peerage upon retiring. So that's who's in the Lords, but what do they actually do? Well, as is the upper chamber in Parliament, its main function is to scrutinise, amend and approve legislation. Once a bill is finished in the Commons, it goes to the Lords, where they can take a look over it. Often, because the Lords have more time on their hands than MPs, and because no party has a majority in the House, the Lords are able to scrutinise legislation a bit more impartially and effectively. Also, Lords are often awarded their peerages thanks to proficiency and expertise in a particular field. So if a bill is on a specific topic, say the European Union, chances are that there'll be a few Lords available who are experts on that particular topic. So what happens if the Lords disagree with a bill that comes through the Commons? Well, in the 19th century, the Lords could just flat out refuse to assent the bill, and that means it would never receive royal assent and never pass into law. However, the Parliament Act of 1911 changed that, so that even if the Lords opposed a bill, they could only delay it for a maximum of 2 years, and couldn't delay money bills relating to taxation or public expenditure. Then going further, the Parliament Act of 1949 shortened the Lords' maximum delay to 1 year, with some key exceptions. This meant that legally, the Lords can't block most bills, even if they disagree with them. However, the Lords can exercise their political power to try and force the Commons to back down, because if they do delay a bill for a year, it's bound to attract media coverage. This happened in 2015, when then-Chancellor George Osborne tried to push through tax credit cuts, but the Lords decided to block it, and thanks to the ensuing media storm, Osborne quickly backed down on the policy. There's an obvious democratic tension here though. It's an unelected chamber frustrating the will of the elected chamber. In order to mitigate this, the Lords are bound by the Salisbury Convention, which dictates that they can't block any legislation that previously appeared in the governing party's manifesto. As well as scrutinising legislation, the Lords have select committees, which produce reports and advice on specific areas. There are 6 permanent select committees in the Lords, and these are the European Union Committee, the Science and Technology Committee, the Communications Committee, the Constitution Committee, the Economic Affairs Committee, and the International Relations Committee. In addition to this, there are also temporary, so-called ad hoc committees, which are formed in response to contemporary issues. Until 2005, there was also a 7th permanent committee, called the APPELLATE Court, which was essentially the highest court in the UK, composed of so-called law lords. Again, this led to a bit of democratic tension, because the old system meant that the most powerful element of the judiciary was contained within the legislature. So, in 2005, to disentangle the judiciary and the legislature, the Constitutional Reform Act replaced the Appellate Committee with the Supreme Court, and created an independent commission for judicial appointments, called the Judicial Appointments Commission. Technically, Lords can also hold government positions, but this practice has become less common, because, well, it's not particularly democratic to have an unelected politician running a government department. So, that's the Lords. At first glance, it makes no sense, having an unelected chamber with hereditary politicians in the UK in the 21st century. But before you dismiss it out of hand, it does have some advantages over the House of Commons. The Commons has an unfortunate selection bias. As everyone knows, most normal people don't want to be MPs. Having a chamber full of people who never set out to be politicians, but are merely there due to the virtue of their talent and expertise, and who aren't constantly afraid of the electorate, seems to have served the UK well thus far, even if it isn't particularly democratic. Anyway, if you'd like us to do another video on the future of the House of Lords, whether it has a place in the UK's future, then, well, the patrons have already asked for it, so it's going to be happening. So if you want to see that video when it's released, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when it comes out.